Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Quitcast for authors. My name is Becca Syme, and I am an author success coach. And my primary reason that I make these podcasts is because I have coached more than 6,000 individual authors, and that volume allows me to see patterns in sort of a larger kind of meta sense. But I would posit that most of us can't see these patterns because we just don't see a high enough volume of people. And so I want to give you the benefit of both me having sat and coached a lot of people, but also being able to kind of see past and future into the industry itself and thinking about specifically sustainability. And sustainability for me is okay, now that we are normalizing into what this industry is going to be and going to become, we need to think about how do I have the best possible career for myself in the short term and the long term. And some of it is going to be mindset stuff, and some of it will be action points inside of the business. And so let's jump in. If you didn't catch the previous episode, we talked about the four pillars of sustainability for an author career as being attention, managing your finances, managing your health, and managing your self-worth. We did attention last time, and we're going to do finances today. And I know some of you are going to automatically want to opt out because we're talking about money, but I'm going to encourage you to pay attention at least for the beginning of this, because I'm going to give the first couple of action points in ways that I think everyone can do, even if you are not primarily interested in finances in your business. And this is just for, again, sustainability and longevity. So let's jump in. We have to differentiate a little bit between people who are treating this author life like a business and people who are not. Because if you're treating this like a business, it's even more important that the finances are sustainable for you. But if you're treating it like it's not necessarily a business, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be at least conscious of what you're spending, because resources and the spending of resources are supposed to gain you something. And I think a lot of us are primarily making decisions about finances, especially about the way that we spend money on things that are supposed to bring us readers or supposed to bring us sales, that we're spending money on things and not evaluating whether or not these things are working for us. And so even if all you do, if you're not one of the I need this to be like a business people, and in which case you could probably skip this episode and move on to the next one, after making sure that you at least ask the question, that you at least ask, when I spend money, am I reasonably gaining something, or am I primarily taking action on behalf of a fear of missing out, or a fear of being behind, or a fear? And we're going to talk about some of these things in a minute, but I want to address this at the beginning because I think a lot of people who don't quote unquote treat this like a business are not, they're going to want to opt out of this. And I still think it's important, even if you are not trying to like track profit and loss, I still think it's important to consider that your investment of your time and your money needs to yield something for you in your business. And for some of us, we struggle enough with, positive feelings and motivation that even just us spending 15 minutes consuming someone's newsletter or listening to a podcast, if it helps us feel more encouraged to do the work of this writing life, then it was worth it for our time, right? But we tend not to do that as often unless we are sort of wired for that analytical, I have to do ROI, calculate ROI on everything. And so I just want, again, to put in a plug for have some level of attention to this, because subconsciously, the more you spend time and money on something and it's not yielding you what you want to get out of it, the less likely it is to be sustainable for you. So even just a little bit of attention would be great. So that's kind of the not treating it like a business side. For those of us who are treating it like a business, then that's kind of who I'm aiming the majority of the rest of this episode at. Everyone else can listen. I think there's still something to be gained from this in terms of like how to evaluate things. But specifically, I'm going to talk to people who need this to be either not losing money, right? Like you need it to be profitable, or you actually need the income to come back into your household, because you can't physically sustain just losing money on this business for indefinitely. So it isn't always just about, I want this to be a full-time job. Often the need to treat it like a business is because I don't have unlimited resources. I know many of us feel like we're not qualified to be making some of these decisions, and many of us were not business owners in the past. And I think that's part of why we are now doing some content on the side. We did a business phases digital conference in the fall. We're going to have those workshops available on the Patreon coming up here soon in the next couple of weeks. And then my goal is to be able to produce some consistent content for people who need to have some kind of structure for how to treat this like a business, but maybe don't have experience running a business of their own before, maybe have not really worked in corporate in the past, or haven't worked in any like small business where you had to be conscious of the inner workings of the business. Like many of us can work for someone else, but have no idea about how the business gets run because we just don't get to those levels or we don't want to be on those levels. And so it's really important to know if you don't have the skills for this, it's going to feel daunting. Like you're going to want to not pay attention to it because it feels like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. And so my goal is to break this down into some small steps that will be actionable for anyone, no matter what kind of business savvy you have, but specifically for people who don't have a lot of experience in running their own business. These are the how do I coach people? What's the most common action points that I give for coaching when we're talking about finances in particular? So let's jump in. What I'm going to suggest, like I suggested in the last episode, is that you write down every single one of these action points as you're listening that either resonates with you or where you get some kind of an emotion about it. And I want you to then think about those things and what kind of action you need to be taking. Some of the reason these things activate us are because we don't have the skills to do them right now. And so if there's something that really activates you that I say, I need you to do this action point, and you're like, "Ooh, yuck," and that feeling comes up of like overwhelm, etc. Overwhelm is just a signal. It's not a signal that you're stupid or that you've done anything wrong. It's just a signal that you need to pause and think, or you need more information. So that there is nothing wrong with you if you don't have these skills already. The goal is to try to not be judgmental about ourselves and to give ourselves some runway in terms of skill application. So if you don't know them, fine. I'll try to give some suggestions about how to execute these. So, action point number one, do not make fast choices. Don't make immediate decisions. Don't, if someone puts out something in an email that says if you don't act right now, you're going to lose the opportunity, resist the urge to give in to that, because what you want, even if you only wait an hour, even if you only wait 10 or 15 minutes, don't make immediate choices. Always give yourself at least a little bit of time to let that fear cycle, so at least 20 minutes, because that's the biological fear cycle, right? But I would prefer that you give yourself 24 hours just because you want to give your brain time to process everything. I'm not a fan of fast decisions in terms of like something you hadn't been considering before. There are many of us who have been considering things over time where we might say, like, I all of a sudden made this decision, but the reality is I had been considering this in the past. And then, of course, there are going to be the activators who just want to be able to buy covers whenever they want to. And if you can afford to do that, great, awesome. Go ahead and do what you want. And again, this is the you're allowed to QTP Becca as well. But the reason I say no fast decisions is that even for activators who are by nature impatient, right? They have a high capacity to immediately take action when they see an action point. Even for activators, making fast decisions can be a bad idea when they are primarily driven by the fear of missing out. So I just want you to be cautious. So there's a difference for me between like I'm an auto buy, let's say for a Travis Baldree book, right? I don't have to think about it because I know that I like what he does enough that every single time he puts out a book, I'm going to purchase it. So auto buys for me would fall into a different category. I'm sure that some of you have people who are auto buy course creators or people who are auto buy, etc. Like I'm making an exception for things that you would do quickly because you have so much experience with a person. And I have those people as well, so I understand that. What I mean is making fast decisions about things where I either have not been considering it in the past or where the wording makes it feel like if I don't take action right now, I'm going to miss out on something. That is such a danger zone for me in terms of you need to have your best financial interests at heart. You need to be able to think not necessarily think long term like a futuristic would, but from a futuristic to you, if you don't at least have some level of pausing, we're going to spend ourselves into a place that we can't recover from. And that's my reasoning really for having this be one of the primary pillars. When we make fast decisions, we often don't think about them in a way that we should be thinking about them. So I just want us action point number one. I tell people to institute a 24-hour rule. If you want me to do something and I can't wait 24 hours to do it, and it isn't a life or death situation, that feels icky to me. I don't like that. So I'm always going to wait and not make fast decisions. Action point number two, have at least a little consciousness about what you're spending. So, because most of us have to do taxes, and like I would assume that everyone who's watching this podcast or listening to this podcast has to do taxes. So, because you have to organize things, if you're going to write off your expenses into categories, I want you to at least have some kind of consciousness about your numbers in comparison to other years or your numbers in comparison to, let's say, like a usual average. So, is it normal for someone to spend 90% of their expenses on whatever it is, right? Um, whatever the category is. I just want you to have at least a little bit of consciousness about it. I think a lot of us don't want to look at money because it feels overwhelming to us. We don't necessarily have the skills. Not all of us are budgeters, right? So what I'm not talking about is I don't think every single person has a personality where they need to be super conscious of what they're spending at all times. I don't think that helps everyone. Instead, I think there are certain principles, like no fast decisions is one of them, where you can get around overspending if you will just not make fast choices. And the example that I use a lot because it happens consistently is that if you purchase something on one of the social media platforms that where they're advertising, you get put in a bucket, and the more money you spend, the more they're going to send stuff at you. And the higher amount of money you've spent in the past, the more likely they're going to send really big ticket items at you. And it does not take very many clicks to spend quite a bit of money, and we are usually unconscious about it. So I just want us to have some level of consciousness about the numbers, even if all you did was go through and add up. Like every single month, what am I spending on X? Every single year, what am I spending on Y? Like, I just want there to be some level of consciousness. And if it's going to stress you out too much to do it, I'm going to say that's fine. But the more likely you are to want to make a profit off of this business, the more conscious you have to be about your numbers because you have to be willing to make decisions where you say, you know what, as much as I like, I don't know, supporting Becca's podcast. I'm supporting 17 podcasts. And so maybe I need to not do Becca's podcast this year because, it's a big chunk of money to spend on everybody's podcast. So I would say any level of watching your numbers is helpful for me. But specifically, I want you to look at what am I spending in these different categories? And then the next action point kicks in. Next action point number three is evaluate for value to your business. So there's a level of value that every single thing that you consume brings to you. The things that we talked about in the last episode, the attention, where I'm spending my time in exchange for some kind of value, where my encouragement last time was to evaluate what are you getting out of this and is it something that you want to get out of it, right? Just some level of consciousness. Because I think when we spend money and we don't have a consciousness about it, and we're not thinking about did it bring some kind of value into my business, we are going to end up spending way more money than we have to because I have it to spend is one thing. Like if I'm just never going to reach the end of my capacities to spend money on something because I either make so much money in a day job or I have so much money, etc., set aside, or I'm independently wealthy, things like that, then that's a really different set of circumstances that you're in. But the majority of writers need to evaluate for value and specifically looking at how many different things am I using for X. So, for instance, if I have several different tracking softwares and they don't all provide something very different from each other, do I really need to utilize all of them or could I consolidate? Like, this is my please evaluate things for value encouragement is it would be better for us because what often happens is we just continue to purchase things over time. Like, I can't tell you how many subscriptions I have now to streaming services just because every time something new comes up, I say, yeah, I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll do that because I really want to see whatever movie or show is on that service. And that might have been 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I still every once in a while might watch something, but I'm not conscious of the fact if I look at it on my bank statement or whatever, or if I look at it on my budget, I'm not conscious of what the total amount of value is that I'm getting out of that amount of money that I'm paying for. Could I be getting a similar amount of value for significantly less money? Is it worth not having access to something because I could narrow and shrink? And still get basically the same amount of entertainment or the same amount of um, uh, guidance or whatever it is that I'm getting out of that. And the way that I think about evaluating for value is if I took that thing away, like if I don't subscribe to Netflix, is my life going to be worse for it? Am I going to miss it enough that I would go back in and subscribe again? Like that is my evaluate for value suggestion. Action point number 4, wait for proof. There needs to be some kind of very specific outcome that you are getting when you are spending money. And I think so many of us just don't have a consciousness about the way that finances can snowball on us. And we're just constantly making these decisions that are essentially either responsive decisions, like responsive to some kind of data. We may not have even been thinking about how much we needed this type of course until we saw this particular course. And now we're just purchasing it because we haven't stopped to look for whether or not this course is going to be valuable for me or has it been valuable for other people. And as someone who's a course creator, I understand that when I run a course for the first time, I have to prove that what I'm doing is worth it to people. But that's from a course creator perspective, right? Like that's how I assess things. And I think that things should be valuable whether they're free or paid, by the way. Like I think that the requirement for something producing value to your business should be the same. But so many of us who are consuming products don't think about that. We don't wait for things to show that, yes, this is something that would be good for people like me. It's good for people who have my personality or who are in the particular phase of business that I'm in right now or who have the assets that I have. Like, we don't wait for proof. We jump so quickly into things. And I understand that some of us are not good at waiting. Like I legitimately understand that. And you can question the premise of me if you want to in that one. But I'm a big fan of I want to make sure if I'm going to spend my money on it, I want to make sure that it's going to deliver the value that I'm looking for. And again, I think so much of this could be saved if we would just not make fast choices. Okay, action point number 5. And this is something you actually have to practice. We can't just have the logical assent that it's important to do this. You can't get better at something unless you practice it. So I need many of us to practice the joy of missing out. And I referenced this in the last podcast episode where we had done this digital conference in the fall where we did a FOMO option and a JOMO option. The FOMO option was here's every single piece of information that we're going to deliver about this. And the JOMO option was here's only the information that we think you need when you're in this phase of your business. And I priced that FOMO option high enough, the difference between the two of them, that it would make you stop and think about whether or not you actually needed to do the FOMO. I wanted to have it be low enough for the people who actually did need the FOMO option. Because there were several people who were like, I don't know what phase I'm in, even after the intro lesson and stuff like that. And I wanted to make sure that it wasn't unreasonable, that it would still be able to provide the amount of value that they needed. But I needed us to practice the joy of missing out on something. Because if we don't consistently practice missing out on things and all we ever do is give in to the fear, then that's all we're ever going to do. We have to practice missing out. So practice missing out on something that you may have otherwise wanted to do. Practice missing out on something that still seems cool or seems like a good idea. And I recognize like some of you are going to choose to miss out on our stuff. That's the price that we pay for being in an oversaturated market in the author help industry. The price that we pay is that when I was first doing courses in 2015, 13, 14, like somewhere around there, almost no one had to miss out on stuff because there was no one teaching courses. There were so few people offering courses at that time. You didn't really have to miss out on anybody's content. Like you didn't have to narrow down because there were so few things available. But now that there's, 10 or 15 times more options than you had 10 years ago. Now we have to practice missing out on stuff that would probably be good for us. I think we don't make conferences that I don't genuinely believe would be good for everyone to participate in. So I think our digital conferences are good for everyone. And I also realize that not everyone's going to participate in them because it's not for everyone at that moment. It might be a financial choice. It might be, I don't really need this kind of development right now. It might be my mindset is good, thanks. It might be I don't need any of that information right now, even if Becca thinks that I do, right? Like I recognize that even the stuff that I make that I think is good for everyone is still not worth everyone's time and finances because you have so many options. There may be something that you need more, that you need to spend that time and money on than whatever it is that I'm producing. And I have to be okay as a content creator with understanding that, especially those of us who were around making courses and creating content 10 years ago, like we have to understand and acknowledge that the saturation point means people are going to have to miss out on things. And I want you to practice JOMO, like practice that missing out, because if you don't, it's going to impact your sustainability in this business. Like if all we ever do is just say yes to everything, we are not going to be able to survive long term. And I want us all to be here as long as we possibly can. This is a related action point, but slightly different. The number 6 action point is don't do everything. And by that, I don't necessarily mean all the courses. By that, I mean all the different ways of selling. So I think what happens when we don't necessarily know how to evaluate whether things are working or not, or if we don't know how to evaluate whether it will work for us, like I can't necessarily tell if I'll be good at Facebook ads or not until I've tried it. I can't tell if I'll be good at AMS ads or not until I've tried it. But I think a lot of us are just trying everything. We are doing everything with the hopes that something will help. And we are not quitting doing things that are not helping. And this primarily for me is about platforms, services, social media, stuff like that. Like things that are just, they are not yielding for us, but we feel like we have to do them because, quote, everyone is doing them, unquote, right? Anytime you find yourself saying that, you need to question the premise of whatever you're doing. But I would rather see us narrow down on things that we can be really good at. Again, better, faster, right? I'm a bigger fan of exponential growth and development rather than trying to see us do everything and just throw spaghetti at the wall and who knows, like have a little bit of objectivity, evaluate whether things are working or not, quit things that aren't working, right? That's the goal. Action point number 7, understand what phase you're in. And I know we haven't done a Quitcast episode yet on the business phases, so some of you won't know the full extent of what I mean. And when I made this action point, I specifically wanted to differentiate between being in the first phase or not being in the first phase, right? Because the majority of authors are still in phase one, and some of us have been in phase one for a decade or for 20 years, or for 25 years. But phase one is the research and development phase where you are not yet making 100% of your investment on your in whatever book you're investing, right? So however much money you're spending on to produce the book, you're not yet making 100% plus of that back. So not just making back your expenses, but making enough that you could invest into other things. So when I say no, understand what phase you're in, I primarily mean, are you in research and development or not? Because when you're in research and development, the decisions that you make about finances are so different because essentially what you're doing is you're trying to figure out how to create a product that's going to generate you income. And you have to make a lot of decisions to try to invest money. Like I have to learn how to run ads. And so then I have to spend money both on maybe an ads course and spend money on advertising itself, in addition to spending money on my books and spending money on all the other things that I need to do as part of my author career, right? But if all I ever do is just spend without consciousness, because what I'm assuming is that it will yield back. Like I'm making an assumption that all books should sell, and therefore all the money I'm spending on advertising or all the money I'm spending on translations or whatever should come back to me because I'm quote unquote making an investment. And we need to understand when we're still in the research and development phase, you have not yet proven that you're investing. You're still learning when you're in research and development phase. So that mindset shift when it comes to finances is really important because I may not continue to try to advertise a book for 6 or 7 years that just continues to not deliver for me. I may move on more quickly when I'm in the research and development phase and see if I can find something that will yield for me. Because if I continue to spend money with the assumption that someday I will make it all back, then I'm not putting any kind of limit on what I'm spending. And I've seen people get 60 and $70,000 into debt trying to make a book sell. Like one book sell. And that fundamental assumption they have underneath every decision that they're making is that, well, this is a business and therefore it's an investment and therefore it has to come back to me at some point. So if I spend this $70,000 on all these different things and then on all these different ads and ad platforms and on all these expensive covers and et cetera, but it has to come back to me because it's an investment, right? And I'm like, not if you're in phase one though, bro. Not if you're in phase one. Because when you haven't yet found this pocket of demand that you can meet consistently, you haven't yet found the way into these reader pockets or into this demand pocket that exists somewhere, you don't yet have the assurance that the money you're going to spend on that book is going to yield, because not every single platform is a profitable platform yet, right? So you need to make sure that you're making decisions if you're in this research and development phase. And again, we'll do more content about this later. The other phases are not as important right now because finances wise, I need you to be more conscious when you are not yet having books that pay for themselves plus. because I need the book to pay for itself if it's going to be profitable. But then if I also need that profit to be able to invest back into the business. So if I'm not yet in that place, I want to be really, really careful about how I'm expecting things to yield profit. If I've already hit a point where I'm in one of the later phases where my revenue goes up every single time I put a book out or every single time I make a new product, then my decision making capacity is slightly different. And like I said, we'll make more content about that in the future. We're also going to have the content from the digital conference available to purchase on the Patreon at some point, so that if you have specific questions about this, that you'll be able to go to that place and get some more direction there. But it is so important when you are in that research and development phase to be really careful about how you're spending money, expecting to make it back. And as long as you know you may or may not get this money back when you're in that early phase, then it helps you to put limits on how aggressively you spend rather than, like, if I had a lemonade stand that I knew if I put in $700 of product, I'm going to make $1,400 back because I know consistently that lemonade stand continues to produce for me, then I'm not going to feel bad if one week I happen to make $1,100 instead of $1,400, because I know that it's likely that that will change because there is a demand there on some level, unless someone else is meeting the demand. But again, we don't run businesses like that. Like, we're not running lemonade stand businesses where there's a competition of one person on each corner and only one of us can get that customer. That's not how the book business works. There are demand limitations for sure because there isn't unlimited amount of demand, but it's not the same. So I don't bring that up to think about direct competition. I bring that up to say, I need you to just be conscious about how you're expecting investments to return for you if your books haven't proven to you yet that they are actually going to return investment. Action point number 8. I almost didn't include this one because finding help can be a challenge sometimes. And I think a lot of the people who are out there who have like experience as an accountant, for instance, or somebody who has, done a lot of this in the past, they're not necessarily the people who are going to go out and say, hey, let me give you advice, because they know that advice is such a, it can be such a dangerous tool when it comes to finances. So I'm caveating this with, I would not trust every single person who says that they're able to give you help in this area. I would still want to know for sure that other people have found them to be helpful and that their advice is consistently good. Like, and again, I say this because I just recently moved new to a new place, and I had to be really cautious about like who I took financial advice from, because back in Montana, I knew everybody and here I don't know anybody. So I needed to be a little more cautious. So just exercise some caution. But I say action point of get help here because I think a lot of us are scared about making financial decisions. And so we're not making them, we're not paying attention to them, primarily because we don't know what we're doing. And there are some people out there who are teaching courses on how to make good choices in your author career and how to invest correctly and things like that. And I would rather see us at least consume some content to think about increasing our skills in that way, even if you're not getting one-on-one help. I still think that I benefited the most when I actually talked to someone about the way that I was investing my money, and it brought me some perspective that I didn't have before, which again, I think is important. I think perspective is really important. It's why I have consistently encouraged us for things like, if you don't have a coach and a therapist, I would rather see people have both of those things because they provide really different opportunities. I feel similarly about financial help, right? Like, I have somebody who helps me with my ads because I don't really understand ads platforms the way that I want to. I have somebody who helps me with my finances because I for sure don't understand spending the way that I want to. Like, this for me is about perspective. And so if you are capable of getting help, even if all you're capable of is consuming some content and just looking at what's out there. And again, I'm saying to the intuitive people, a lot of you are going to want to nope out on this stuff, and I think that's fine. Like, I think intuitively, if you are managing your finances in the way that works best for you, I'm okay with that. But I definitely would like to see us get at least some perspective on, how could I be better managing my finances? Okay, action point number 9. And this is both because of the current economy and because of what is likely to happen in the future in terms of like instability in the economy. I would say you need to prioritize saving wherever possible and wherever possible, get out of debt. So those two things for me are really important in terms of long-time financial viability. I would like to see us be in as little debt as possible and to have as much saved as possible. Both just because I think that creates a lot of security, which is the next action point, but also because I think that it helps us not feel like we have to make quick decisions, which I'm not a fan of quick decisions when it comes to finances, unless you are highly, highly risk tolerant, which most of us just aren't. Okay. Number 10 is increase your security. And I know I'm going to get some pushback on this, but I'm coaching a lot of people who, when their royalties are going down or when their just overall financial picture is going down, they're getting very scared of it going down, but we're not doing anything to increase the security. So we're not going out and looking for part-time work. We're not decreasing spending. We're not, right, et cetera, et cetera. Like, we're not making some of the choices that I would rather see us make to increase security so that we don't make the writing or the creativity pay the price for us feeling insecure. So I'm a huge fan, just as a general rule, of people who have a lot of thinking strengths having at least a part-time job in addition to the writing. I think it can also help to alleviate some financial pressure to have a part-time job in addition to the writing. But it's amazing. Like, when I was first coaching like a high volume of writers. So I was doing coaching and just sort of, coaching my friends and coaching people that I was at publishers with and stuff like that. So it wasn't a huge amount of people at the very, very beginning, like 9, 10, 11, 12, right? Like, it was very kind of hit and miss. But when I was first coaching at volume, when I started to do the Indie Insider class for Margie Lawson and saw a higher number of people come into the course, and I realized just how many people were dominant in intellection in the writing community. And I had this theory of like, well, what's going to happen when you have more time? Because a lot of intellection people who had jobs at the time were like, if I could just go full time, I would write so much more. And I was like, I don't think you will, though, because those of you who have high intellection, like, you're still not going to write a whole ton more than what you were writing before. In fact, what I found was true, which was irony of all ironies, that a lot of people, when they went full time, they actually wrote less than they did when they had the time pressure, because that I have this job and it lasts me all day, and then I only have these 2 hours at night. Like, we were very quick to prioritize writing in those 2 hours because that was necessary for us to keep making progress. But then when we have all of this time during the day, some of it is your brain just can't produce that much creativity in one day. Like, you can't, not everyone can just sit down and write for 8 hours solid. Right. And there are some very famous writers who talk about being able to write for 8 hours in a row, and not everyone can do that. And I want to acknowledge, like, if you can do that, great. I'm a huge fan of doing whatever works for you. But it's important to know, if you can't do that, that there's nothing wrong with you. You're not deficient because you can't do that. It's just the way our brains are wired. But what that means is, if I'm not going to write significantly more with all of this extra time that I have, if I'm doing other things that are going to help the business, awesome, especially if I'm doing things that will increase my personal well-being and things like that, like inner security and things. But if all I'm doing is just sitting around beating myself up because I'm not writing. I would rather see us at least have some kind of part-time job in order to compensate for that time and give yourself a little bit more pressure to force yourself to be writing with that time instead of just not having any pressure whatsoever. And some of you are going to push back on that, and that's fine. But some of you who are pushing back need to listen to me about this because your financial security is at risk in addition to your creativity not being at its peak, because you have too much time, too much free time like your hours. So anyway, increase your security for me means finances are flush. So if you can get additional work, if you can do another part-time job, if you can ask for a raise at work, whatever it is that will increase your security, I'm going to encourage you to do it. And then the very final action point, similar to the last one, and you're going to see this probably in both of the next two as well, is to prioritize the writing. So in the last one, I said prioritize your own work, right? Like put your attention on your own work first. Specifically for me, this one is about prioritizing the writing over everything else. So I think a lot of us are madly trying to do all of these marketing things to get the books to sell. We're trying to do 100 social media things to try to get the books to sell, but we're not prioritizing the actual writing of the books. And that's just what I want to see us do. And if you are able, because I did this last time and I thought that it was helpful, I want you to stop listening right now and open the manuscript. So just open it up, go to the cursor wherever it is, and hang on, I'll do it with you as well. Oh, let's open the nonfiction manuscript. Why not? Okay. So cursor, okay. Yeah. Uh, it's interesting. I'm working just on a side note. I'm working on the second or the second version of the quit book. So the first book I wrote was Dear Writer, You Need to Quit. And I decided to do a Dear Writer, You Still Need to Quit book. And I have and I have gotten to the quit expecting fast results chapter, which is probably beneficial for us to hear in this particular series as well. Because even though I don't talk about this as much when I'm talking about sustainability, I do in the business phases content. Like we have this expectation that things need to happen fast or they're not going to happen. And I need for us to deconstruct that because deconstructing certain messages or unwritten rules or methodologies that we have. I'm hoping to do that series next, but deconstructing some of those expectations we have is a huge part of sustainability because the more we think that it has to happen fast, the more likely we are to take financial risks and do things to try to make it happen right now in order to compensate for that pressure that we feel internally that if it's not happening fast, it's not going to happen. So, anyway, just a side note about that. So, make sure you open your manuscript. Make sure that you go and write, or at least look at where you are and ask yourself if you can write the next sentence. That last action point of prioritize the writing, because the book is the thing that we put into the funnel to make all the money out of it. So just make sure that in all the other things you're doing, all the learning, all the consuming, all of the marketing, all of the packaging, etc., that you're prioritizing the writing whenever you can. That's my best advice. So, thank you so much for being here today and for listening to me talk. Next time, we're going to talk about the third pillar, and I hope to see you all on the next Quitcast. All right. Bye, everybody.